Hey everybody, this is Brad Dyke. I am touching base on a couple of things. I'll be planning on doing some recap videos to kind of bring some of my older videos up to speed. We've got a couple of GUI interface formattings for 520s to 420 to 512 sector formats for SAS devices and so on, and some other things. But one of you guys came up to me and said, "Hey, I need you to show me the math." And I said, "Well, sure, not a problem." And what's he asking about? I think it's a he. He's asking about cooling. How do you figure out the math of convection? Well, I'm going to say right now at the beginning of this video, I'm going to put down in below in the comments some links to the mathematical equations. But many of you may not think that way. You may not think in an equation based kind of strategy, and some of you do. So I'll give you both. So, first things first, go down below, hit the links. There'll be some recommended sites for you to go to based on the environments that you're working on to dictate. Now, what I'm going to spend in this video is the dictation of that environment. What does that mean? Well, the math is never simple because your environment, as you can see behind me, is never the same. If you look in this room, I have plaster walls, I have Class B refracted RF walls, I have on the ceilings up here a plaster ceiling, I have a fan, which I do not use because that's a mistake. Do not have a ceiling fan in your IT environment because it doesn't actually give you cooling power. It just pushes the heat around, and that motor up there is going to make more heat. So I only use the fan when I'm not running my racks because I don't want to exacerbate the heat up there down here in this environment. But there's more to this environment. You have to take into consideration all the metal that you see in the building as well, or in the room. And a very, very big plus is concrete floors. Yes, that's a plus. And I'll explain. So, when you take your environment and you do your math, if you have wood structured rooms or closets, and you have one air conditioning vent inside your environment, and that's usually for just a single room, a traditional HVAC home kind of cooling setup, it's not very good. So, what I would recommend if you have an environment like that, because most of the materials in the room will absorb and hold heat. That's the negative. What is the positive? Sources that generate lower temperatures. Those are the positives, like concrete. Concrete is associated to the ground and it's funneled from the ground. So, therefore, it has its own form of cooling. So, when you put your hand on concrete, it's always the coolest point in the room. Something very important to realize. That's why when you're circulating cool air, you want to pull it from the concrete side and you want to put it up in the hot air area above your ceiling where the hot air is and keep that cooling effect, that convection, as we call it, effect in play. Now, obviously, the square footage, that's height, that's width and length of the room, the metals that are in the room, and most importantly, this really does matter, your rack or your enclosure structure. Now, I'll tell you once again, and I've said this 100 times, I'll say it again. Never, ever, 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 ever put your IT gear inside wood enclosures for any reason. Wood is bad when it comes to electronics. I even did a video where some wood got burned from the electronics because they're not conducive to each other. But metal is. The only problem with metal is the nature of metal itself is a negative. Why is it a negative? Because all of this metal is just like a heat sink. It will suck in the heat. So if you have a really hot room, it's best to just shut everything down correctly and bring the power down. And then at that point in stage, you will be able to cause the entire room to begin the process of cooling down. It does happen. Usually the situation for me is my HVAC, I had a problem with one before and it died. So it's just blowing air. So it was convecting the air around. It was trying to dissipate the coolness from the concrete only because there was no more cooling coil in the system to keep the air cold. It was just taking the cool air from the floor and the ceiling, and that was it. And this room was a solid 98 degrees. Pretty hot. Not good, considering it's an actual garage outside my house. So I have to be very careful. I decided, well, I'm just shutting everything offline, bringing everything offline, and I'm going to let the entire room ambiently cool off. That's all the metal in the room. That includes, yep, you guessed it, everything in the room. Even wood will accumulate and hold heat. All these devices you see here, all the chunks of metal that are laying around, they store heat. The metal structure of my garage door and its framing structure, and even the reflective aluminum surface areas, these all deal with holding heat. So, if you're going to truly do this the right way, you have to, of course, have the measurement specs versus the room size versus the BTU output of your air conditioning and your heating unit, because HVAC is both. It's cooling in the winter, in the summertime, and heating in the wintertime. And your BTU output matches to the ratio of the square footage of the room versus the output put of your server hardware, switches, and so on, which, by the way, will never be all of them running at once because you can't afford that most of the time. You usually run these in stages. That's an important detail. Very few data centers, only production data centers, actually run everything 24/7. The rest of the environments usually will bring up 1/3 of their resources. I only bring up a quarter of my resources in my lab up at a given time because I just don't want to use up a lot of power, and I want to stay within the limitations of my HVAC unit. And I don't need any more resource than that, not initially. But I do have many different platforms I work with, so I have 1/4 on this, 1/4 on that, 1/4 on this, and 1/4 on that. And they all come online in their own separate formats, so I can do 4 levels of advanced distributed testing. So I'll do that in another video and discuss that and how you can have the resources you want, but how to plan them the right way. But with that being said, and in this video take, I will put the math equations down below in this video to help you guys out. And I wanted to do this short little video because being in many data centers myself, I've realized, I have to take everything inside the room as well as the size of the room versus the BTU output of my Liebert arrays or whatever form of HVAC I'm doing at the time, and making sure that my cooler towers are keeping the water chillers at the right temperature that I can have out from the Liebert, so I can keep everything cool and work within those limitations. You have the exact same problem. Better you understand the room environment that you're working in, the better you're going to have a solid HVAC solution to keep everything cool. Well, that is it for this short little video. I thought this would be a really cool chance for me to talk to. I do plan to do a video on how and why and in what format should you deploy your equipment. And I'll try to help do that to help break people down to understand, why do I have so much gear? And yes, I do stress my gear heavily, but I do it in a certain way so it doesn't cost me a fortune. We'll talk to that in the next video. This is Brad Dyke saying goodbye, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye. God bless.